teacher can inspire optimism, spark inventiveness, and may develop a love of learning. Yes, hello dear students, I am Cherry Saldua and together with my group mates Cosicol, Lagare, and Orboc, we will give you insights on the different variations of rubrics and we will definitely teach you how to design a rubric. You know, as future educators, this will help us monitor a student's learning process, develop and revise a lesson plan. This rubric provides a way for a student and a teacher to measure the quality of a body of work. Please bear with us as we tackle another interesting topic. Without further ado, let us now define what is a rubric.
Good day, everyone. But what is a rubrics? It means a scoring guide used to evaluate the quality of students' constructed response. Rubrics defined as a set of criteria and performance indicators arranged according to expected levels of performance. It is a performance-based assessment tool. The rubric is the tool that binds assessment and student achievement by making students and parents aware of expectation from the onset. When this occurs, achievement at high level of performance is a natural outcome. It is to promote the consistent application of learning expectations, learning objectives, or learning standards in the classroom. Importance of rubrics. It is a great tool for teachers because it is a simple way to set up a grading criteria for assignments. Teachers use rubrics to gather data about their students' progress on a particular assignment or skill. Simple rubrics allow students to understand what is required in an assignment, how it will be graded, and how they are progressing toward proficiency. Rubrics are used for both formative assessment in process, feedback to be used for improvement, and summative assessment evaluating written work, projects, oral presentation, or any other class assignments. Essentially, a rubric is a tool for communication between the teacher and the student. Rubrics also make grading easier and less messy for teachers. Next is, rubrics may help students see connections between learning on what will be taught and assessment of what will be evaluated. Rubrics may be provided and explained to students before they begin an assignment to ensure that learning expectation had been clearly communicated to and understood by students and by extension parents or other adults involved in supporting students' education. Rubrics provide students with valuable information about the degree of which a specific learning outcome had been achieved. They provide students with concrete feedback that displays area of strength and areas in need of improvement. Students can use this feedback as a tool to further development of their abilities.
Good day everyone, this is Nonna Orboc and this time I will be tackling about the rubrics for performance assessment. Authentic performance-based learning, as always, is a great way to make learning meaningful to students and to encourage them to be creative, innovative, and constructive. However, assessing students' project can sometimes be a problem because there is no clear-cut answer or solution. For this reason, rubrics have become increasingly popular. Rubrics consist of objectives, performance characteristics, and points or scores that indicate the degree of which the objective were met. It is very important that rubrics should be introduced to the students at the very beginning of the project unit, and as much as possible, present the rubric to the class or collaborate with the students to structure the rubric. This allows students to understand the criteria for assessment before they start the project. Rubric also help to make the evaluation of the project more objective and consistent. There are three basic categories of rubrics for performance assessment, and these are the following: checklist, rating skills, and holistic scoring. First to that is checklist. Checklist contains a list of behavior or specific steps which can be marked as present or absent, complete or incomplete, yes or no, and etc. In some cases, students use checklists to ensure that they have completed all the steps and considered all of the possibilities. For example, the checklist at the blue rubric from the Center for Technology in Learning is an observation checklist that a teacher could use to assist students on science experiments, whereas the Multimedia Mania checklist is designed for self-assessment by students. Rubrics with rating skills are very popular and effective for performance assessment. Rating skills are used when a simple yes or no or present or absent is not adequate for measuring the performance or a product. The skills can include terms such as novice, intermediate, and proficient, and they might include and specific point values. Below is an example of a rubric with rating scale. And the last one is the holistic scoring. From the word itself, holistic, meaning as a whole, the student will be scored holistically and there is one overall score instead of discrete dimensions. Holistic scale often used for performances such as dance and music. Although holistic scales can be easier to create and to score, but the disadvantage is they do not provide the amount of feedback that is possible with a rating scale. That includes multiple dimensions. Below is an example of holistic rubric.
Good day, everyone. Now, let's move on to the types of rubrics. There are two types of rubrics and of methods for evaluating students' efforts. These are the holistic and the analytic rubrics. First, let's tackle about the holistic rubrics. When we say holistic rubrics, it is a single criteria rubrics or one-dimensional used to assess participants' overall achievement on an activity or item based on predefined achievement levels. So here, the performance descriptions are written in paragraph and usually in a full sentences. Kindly look at the example given. A holistic rubrics consists of a single scale with all criteria to be included in evaluation being considered together. Example, declarity, organizations, and mechanics. With a holistic rubric, the rater assigns a single score usually on a 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 point scale. But, as you can see in the given example, it only has 1 to 4 scale based on the overall judgment of students' work. The rater matches an entire piece of a student's works to a single description and the scale. In short, holistic rubrics allows you to assess students' overall performance on an activity or assessment based only in a single scale using predefined achievement levels. Holistic rubrics are best used when there is no correct answers or response and the focus is overall quality, proficiency, or understanding on the specific content or skills. On the other hand, there are also advantages and disadvantages of holistic rubrics. It has 3 advantages. First is, it gives emphasis on what the learner is able to demonstrate rather than on what he or she cannot do. Holistic rubrics contains broad objectives and list evaluation course, each with an overall criterion summary that encompasses multiple skills. However, it makes easier to the reviewer to provide general comments. Second, it saves time by minimizing the number of decisions raters make. And the third one is, it applied consistently by trained raters, increasing reliability. So here, trained raters tend to apply them consistently, resulting in more reliable measurement. While there are also 3 disadvantages of holistic rubrics. First, it does not provide specific feedback for improvement. General feedback is provided by making it difficult to provide feedback-specific criteria. This approach is more simplistic and relies on generalizations when writing the criteria. Second, when a student work is at varying levels spanning the criteria points, it can be difficult to select the single best description. And the third one is, criteria cannot be weighted. The second types of rubrics is the analytic rubrics. It is a two-dimensional rubrics with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria as rows. It allows you to assess participants' achievement based on multiple criteria using a single rubric. You can assign different weights or values to different criteria and include an overall achievement by totaling the criteria. It is actually written in the table form. So kindly look at the example given. As you can see, an analytic rubric resembles a grid with the criteria for a student product listed in the leftmost column and with levels of performance listed across the top row.
The cells within center of the rubric may be left blank or may contain descriptions of what the specified others look like for each level of performance. When scoring with an analytic rubric, each of the criteria is scored individually. Analytic rubrics are particularly useful also for problem solving or application assessments because a rubric can list a different category for each components of the assessment. For example, a rubric for a research paper could include categories for organization, writing, argument, sources cited, depth of content knowledge, and more. A rubric for a presentation could include categories related to style, organization, language, content, etc. Through this, students benefit from receiving rubrics because they learn about the relative strengths and weaknesses. So there are also advantages and disadvantages of analytic rubrics. First advantage is that it provides useful feedback on areas' strengths and weaknesses. And second is criterion can be weighted to reflect the relative importance of each dimension. So you can provide feedback on strengths and weaknesses, and criterion can be weighted and scored. However, they do take more time to develop. While the disadvantage of analytic rubrics are first, it takes more time to create and use this than a holistic rubric. And second, unless each point for each criterion is well defined, raters may not arrive at the same score. To sum it up, holistic criterion provide a single score to summarize a student's performance on a given task or it assists student work as a whole. Whereas, analytic rubrics provide several scores for the task, one for each different category being evaluated. And that would be all. Thank you.
Know that you can already differentiate the types of rubrics and its applications. I will be discussing the 6 steps in creating a rubric. As future educators, it will be a big help for us when we decide to use a rubric for assessing an essay, a project, a group work, or any other task that does not have a clear right or wrong answer. Let us remember that a good rubric needs to be designed with care and precision in order to truly help teachers distribute and receive the expected work. With that, the first step would be defining your goal. Before you can create a rubric, you need to decide the type of rubric you'd like to use, and that will largely be determined by your goals for the assessment. You need to be clear with your goal. Ask yourself, how detailed do you want your feedback to be? How will you break down your expectations for this project? Are all the tasks equally important? How do you want to assess performance? Do you want to give one final grade on the project or a cluster of smaller grades based on several criteria? Are you grading based on the work or on participation? Once you've figured out how detailed you'd like the rubric to be and the goals you're trying to reach, you can now proceed to step number 2. Choose a rubric type. Although there are many variations of rubrics, it can be helpful to at least have a standard set to help you decide where to start. As what Ms. Cosicol discussed, there are 2 types of rubrics that are commonly used. The first one is the analytic rubric. This is the standard grid rubric that many teachers routinely use to assess students' work. This is the optimal rubric for providing clear and detailed feedback. The other one is holistic rubric. It is much easier to create but much more difficult to use accurately. The teacher matches the student work in its entirety to a single description on the scale essays. But it does not leave room for detailed feedback on student work. Now the third step would be to determine your criteria. This is where the learning objectives for your unit or course come into play. In here, you'll need to brainstorm a list of knowledge and skills you would like to assess for the project. Group them according to similarities and get rid of anything that is not absolutely critical. Remember, a rubric with too much criteria is difficult to use. Try to stick with at least 4 to 7 specific subjects for which you'll be able to create unambiguous and measurable expectations in the performance levels. You'll want to be able to spot the criteria quickly while grading and be able to explain them quickly when instructing your students. The fourth step in designing a rubric is to create your performance levels. Once you have determined the broad levels you would like students to demonstrate mastery of, you will need to figure out what type of scores you will assign based on each level of mastery. Most rating scales include between 3 and 5 levels. Some teachers use a combination of numbers and descriptive labels like 4 is exceptional, 3 is satisfactory, and etc. While other teachers simply assign numbers, percentages, letter grades, or any combination of the 3 for each level. You can arrange them from highest to lowest or lowest to highest as long as your levels are organized and easy to understand. Now, the fifth step is writing descriptors for each level of your rubric. This is probably your most difficult step in creating a rubric. In here, you will need to write short statements of your expectations underneath each performance level for every single criteria. The descriptions should be specific and measurable. The language should be parallel to help with the student's comprehension, and the degree to which the standards are met should be explained. To use an analytic essay rubric as an example, if your criteria was organization and you used the 4 as exceptional, 3 as satisfactory, 2 as developing, and 1 as unsatisfactory scale, you would need to write the specific content a student would need to produce to meet each level. It could look something like on the picture. Let's then proceed to step number 6, revise your rubric. After creating the descriptive language for all of the levels, making sure it is parallel, specific, and measurable, you need to go back through and limit your rubric to a single page. Too many parameters will be difficult to assess at once, and may be an ineffective way to assess students' mastery of a specific standard. Consider the effectiveness of the rubric, asking for students' understanding and co-teachers' feedback before moving forward. Do not be afraid to revise as necessary. It may even be helpful to grade a sample project in order to gauge the effectiveness of the rubric. You can always adjust the rubric if needed before handing it out, but once it is distributed, it will be difficult to retract. Now that you already know the steps in designing a rubric, you can now create your own. Just be clear with your goal and the performance you want to achieve for your students. Now, the following are the examples of a scoring rubric. So basically, creating a rubric is a tool to help teachers communicate expectations, provide focused feedback, and grade products. You know, creating a great rubric is more than just slapping some expectations on the paper, assigning some percentage points, and calling it a day. It is something that motivates learners to do good in their assigned tasks or even in their performance in the class. So this is just for today. Magandang araw at maraming salamat sa pakikinig.